Within the next few minutes, you will understand why countless men across the modern world are quietly stepping away from love. Not because they are weak or afraid, but because they see something far more unsettling: clarity. Søren Kierkegaard once warned that the greatest hazard of all, losing oneself, can occur very quietly in the world, as if it were nothing at all. Yet he never imagined a time when men would willingly abandon love itself in order to protect the fragments of themselves that remain intact. Picture a man of 29, a rising consultant in New York. By every metric, status, income, appearance, he is what society calls a catch. But each evening he returns to an empty apartment, not with despair, but with purpose. He belongs to a silent exodus. Men who have looked into the hollow machinery of modern romance and decided it is no longer worth the cost. This is not bitterness. It is not anger. It is something colder, quieter, and far more enduring. The question is how we arrived at this point. Kierkegaard described despair as the sickness unto death, not a disease that ends life, but one that corrodes it from within. Modern relationships, for many men, have become breeding grounds for precisely that kind of despair. Data from the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships shows that men today are over 50% less likely to pursue romance compared to their fathers. The American Sociological Review notes that nearly 1 in 3 men under 30 reported no sexual intimacy in the past year, a record high. But this shift is not about sex. It is about something deeper: the collapse of meaning in intimacy. In the 19th century, Kierkegaard told the story of a man who loved a woman, but foresaw that marriage would extinguish the very passion that had drawn him to her. He called this the aesthetic paradox, that once love is bound, it begins to bury itself. Fast forward to the 21st century, and millions of men are living this paradox daily. Longitudinal research from psychological science, following more than 10,000 couples, found that men's marital satisfaction plummets within a year, while women's satisfaction often remains steady. Why? Because men are pressed into roles that demand the slow amputation of their inner life. But here is the darker twist. Studies from the University of Chicago in 2018 revealed that men who remain single and childless report greater levels of life satisfaction than their married peers. Let that settle in. The very institutions men were taught to revere: marriage, fatherhood, conventional family, are those most likely to erode their joy. Kierkegaard anticipated this torment when he wrote, "Marry, and you will regret it. Do not marry, and you will also regret it." The modern man is not retreating out of despair, but because he has run the numbers. And behind these numbers lies betrayal. Picture the man who works 60, 70 hours a week to create a home, only to have it dismantled in divorce court because his partner was unhappy. Or the man who sacrifices for years as an emotional caretaker only to be left behind when someone taller, wealthier, or more exciting comes along. Research from Cornell University shows that nearly 70% of divorces are initiated by women, usually citing discontent rather than abuse or betrayal. Kierkegaard called this the despair of possibility, the torment of realizing that no matter how much effort you give, it is never sufficient. Yet this movement is not only about grief. It is also about liberation. The men who step away from love are not failures. They are pioneers. They are those who looked into the void and concluded the only winning move is not to play. And it is here that their true journey begins. What they discover is not isolation, but a hidden form of power. A power that philosophers, warriors, and outcasts across history have all encountered. Now, let us step into that power. You will meet a man who lost everything yet rebuilt himself into something untouchable. You will see how Kierkegaard's most unsettling insight transforms despair into fuel. And you will uncover why walking away from love does not mark the end, but the beginning of an entirely new existence. There is an ancient story from Sparta, long buried beneath the noise of modern culture. When a boy came of age, the elders stripped him of his possessions and cast him into the wilderness alone. His trial, known as the proving, was meant to teach one brutal lesson. You are enough, even when you have nothing. Kierkegaard intuited the same truth when he observed, "The highest and most beautiful things in life are not to be heard about, nor read about, nor seen, but, if one will, are to be lived." Yet today, men are raised to believe the opposite, that their worth is determined by being chosen, by love, by validation. What happens when a man stops searching for approval and instead turns inward? Consider James, a 32-year-old architect. He found himself kneeling on the floor of his apartment, holding the engagement ring his fiancée had just returned. Her explanation was merciless in its simplicity. "I just don't feel it anymore." For months, James numbed himself with alcohol, distractions, anything to avoid the silence. But one night he picked up Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling. He read a line that pierced him. The knight of faith is obliged to rely upon himself alone, to feel himself shut up within himself. That single passage shifted the ground beneath his feet. From that moment, James stopped chasing love. He stopped filling the void with temporary distractions. He embraced solitude as a discipline. Within a year, he had visited 14 countries, launched a consulting firm that tripled his income, and most importantly, discovered a truth most men never touch. Loneliness is not the absence of others, but the absence of oneself. A study in the Journal of Positive Psychology confirmed this. Men who embraced solitude for 6 months or longer reported surges in confidence, creativity, and resilience. Kierkegaard called this the leap to faith, the terrifying act of confronting freedom without leaning on anyone else. But solitude is not only healing, it is transformative. History is filled with men who alchemized heartbreak into greatness. Nietzsche, shattered by Lou Salome's rejection, poured his agony into Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Beethoven, struck deaf and abandoned, composed symphonies that reshaped the world. Kierkegaard himself, after breaking his engagement with Regine Olsen, produced his most enduring works. There is a pattern here, as a 2021 Harvard study revealed. Men who turned rejection into creative or intellectual pursuit were 3 times more likely to achieve exceptional success than those who moved on conventionally. But here lies the shadow. An independent man unsettles the system. Society does not want him whole. Why? Because an emotionally autonomous man is unpredictable. He does not consume to numb himself. He does not stay in hollow relationships out of fear. He becomes what Kierkegaard called a solitary arrow flying towards an unknown target. And such a man is dangerous. Take David, a former corporate lawyer, after his divorce. He abandoned his 6-figure career and retreated to a cabin in Montana. Friends called it a breakdown. Yet from that silence, David began writing raw essays on masculinity, loss, and rebirth. Within a year, he had built an online following of 500,000 men who recognized themselves in his words. The media labeled him a radical, but the truth was simpler. David had stumbled into what Kierkegaard named the dizziness of freedom. He realized solitude was not a void, but a mirror. Here is the secret rarely spoken. The moment a man stops seeking love is the moment he becomes uncontainable. Not dangerous in the sense of violence, but dangerous in the sense that a storm is dangerous. Free, alive, untamed. A 2022 study in the Quarterly Journal of Experimental Psychology found that men who voluntarily embraced solitude showed significant increases in decisiveness, risk-taking, and mental clarity. Kierkegaard was right. Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. Yet what he left unsaid is that beyond the dizziness lies a strength no one can strip away. But then comes the forbidden question. What happens when a man who has sworn off love finds it placed before him again? What does freedom demand when confronted with temptation? This is where the story twists into something even more dangerous. Imagine Elias, a 36-year-old former investment banker who, after 3 failed engagements, vowed never to touch love again. He withdrew to a coastal village in Portugal, shaping a life of deliberate solitude. His mornings began with swims in the Atlantic. His evenings ended with candlelit writing sessions. The silence was so profound he could hear the rhythm of his own pulse. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday in a quiet cafe, a woman sat beside him. She said nothing. She did not even glance at him. Yet the way she turned the pages of her book, calm, unhurried, as if she had all the time in the world, split something open inside him. Kierkegaard once warned, "Once you label me, you negate me." Elias had labeled himself a man beyond love, and now life itself was undoing his claim. This is the paradox almost no one speaks of. The moment a man fully lets go of love is the moment it may return, but not in the same form. A 2023 study in the archives of sexual behavior found that men who abstained from romance for more than 2 years no longer craved superficial intimacy. Instead, they longed for raw, authentic connection. Kierkegaard foresaw this when he wrote, "Love does not alter the beloved. It alters itself." And so, the man who has rebuilt himself no longer desires to be needed. He desires only to be chosen, not as a provider or a crutch, but as a sovereign being. History offers echoes of this crossroad. Nikola Tesla, after an unfulfilled romance, devoted himself entirely to invention. Van Gogh, rejected repeatedly in love, translated his torment into canvases that became immortal. And Kierkegaard himself, after ending his engagement to Regine Olsen, spent the rest of his life writing to her, for her, about her, not as a lover, but as a philosopher haunted by the idea of love. In his journals, he confessed, "I could die for her, but I cannot live for her. That is the razor's edge." The man who has known absolute freedom cannot return to the ordinary bonds of love. Yet he may stumble into something far more rare. Modern psychology has a name for this phenomenon. Postromantic clarity, a 2021 study in personality and social psychology review, tracked more than 1,000 men who had given up on relationships for 5 years or more. When they eventually allowed love back, their standards had not merely risen, they had transformed. They no longer sought beauty or status, but one thing only, a woman who would not ask them to betray themselves. Kierkegaard expressed it in his way. To love another is to stand in relation to her as one eternal being to another. But here is the treachery. Modern culture, saturated with rom-com fantasies and curated Instagram ideals, is unprepared for men like this. An OkCupid analysis from 2022 showed that 83% of women under 35 swiped left on men who signaled too much self-sufficiency. One respondent explained, "He seems like he doesn't need me." Kierkegaard understood this tension, writing in either, "The unhappy lover remembers, the happy lover forgets." The man who has stepped beyond illusion does neither. He observes. And observation itself is the death of illusion. Consider Leo, a former Marine who spent 7 years in exile building a wilderness survival school after his divorce. One afternoon in a Denver bookstore, a woman asked him for a recommendation, not to impress him, not to flirt, but simply because she wanted to read Kierkegaard. Leo later recalled, "It wasn't that she was perfect. It was that she didn't expect me to be. They have been together 4 years now. They do not cohabitate. They may never marry." And that is precisely the point. Love no longer requires surrender. It becomes an accompaniment, not a cage. The Stoics intuited this. The samurai lived by it. The Vikings sang of it in sagas of lone wanderers. Kierkegaard circled it in works of love. To love is to stand in absolute relation to the absolute. Translation: the man who has faced solitude no longer needs love to complete him. He may, if fortune allows, permit it to walk beside him. But this raises the most unsettling question yet. If men redefine love not as surrender, but as sovereignty, is this the death of love as we know it, or its evolution? There is an unspoken law woven through every culture. A man who cannot walk away from anything can never truly belong to himself. The Spartans coded it into their egoge, the samurai into Bushido, the Vikings into their sagas of wandering exiles. Kierkegaard said it more starkly: the crowd is untruth. To step beyond the collective script is to face isolation, but it is also to claim sovereignty. Take Victor, a neuroscientist of 41, after 2 divorces and a betrayal that nearly destroyed him. He rebuilt himself in solitude. His mornings began with Kierkegaard's journals at dawn. His nights ended with jiu-jitsu training at midnight. In that crucible, he unearthed a law of male psychology that few modern therapists dare to acknowledge. The most dangerous man is not the one who hates women, but the one who no longer seeks their approval. When Victor eventually met a brilliant, self-possessed woman, he did not crumble. He walked away, not because he feared intimacy, but because he refused to betray the freedom he had forged. History confirms what psychology now measures. A 2024 meta-analysis in evolutionary psychological science, reviewing 2 millennia of human mating patterns, found that men are most attractive at the precise moment they are least dependent, not manipulative, not cruel, simply indifferent to validation. Kierkegaard framed this distinction as the gap between the aesthetic man, who chases pleasure, and the knight of faith, who pursues purpose. The modern man, stepping away from love, is not discarding intimacy. He is graduating beyond it. Consider the parable of the Black Dinner in 15th century Scotland. The Earl of Douglas was invited to a feast by King James II, a supposed offering of peace. Midway through the meal, the king's men dropped a black bull's head onto the table, the sign of death. Douglas was dragged outside and executed. The lesson: never mistake an invitation for sanctuary. Modern men live a softer version of this horror. They enter relationships under promises of companionship only to discover hidden contracts of sacrifice, obligation, and eventual abandonment. Kierkegaard foresaw this trap when he wrote, "The tyrant dies and his rule is over. The martyr dies and his rule begins." Many men refuse to be martyrs for a love that demands their diminishment. Yet there is another path, one radical enough to escape both despair and bitterness. Anthropologists studying the Himba tribe of Namibia in 2023 found something startling. Women often chose hunters who failed more often than they succeeded. Why? Because those men spent their free time teaching, laughing, and telling stories. The tribe had a word for it: okurumba, the art of being fully alive outside of productivity. Kierkegaard hinted at this in Stages on Life's Way. The door to happiness opens outward. To step beyond the demand to provide, to conquer, or to be chosen is to redefine love on terms that do not require self-erasure. And it is already happening. A 2025 Pew Research study reported that over 40% of never-married men under 40 now identify as romantically disengaged, not lonely, but sovereign. These men volunteer more, create more, and report higher fulfillment than their coupled peers. Dating platforms reflect the paradox. Searches for Kierkegaardian men, introspective, self-contained, have surged by 300% in a single year. The less men chase, the more they are desired. The less they need, the more they are needed. Here lies the closing revelation. In the 1970s, Harvard psychologists placed infant monkeys in a room with 2 surrogate mothers. One, a wire frame that dispensed food. The other covered in cloth that offered only warmth. Even starving, the monkeys clung to the cloth figure. The researchers called it contact comfort. Modern men, after decades of being told they are valuable only for what they provide, are leaving the wire mother behind. They are seeking the cloth, not from women, but from life itself, from art, purpose, brotherhood, and the quiet dignity of self-possession. Kierkegaard understood this hunger. In his final journal entry before his death at 42, he wrote, "The truth is a snare. You cannot have it without being caught." And that is the essence of this quiet revolution. Men are being caught, not by despair, not by rejection, but by a truth too blinding to ignore. That the deepest love story of a man's life was never meant to be with another, but with the self he might have become had he refused to compromise. That man is waiting,